Hey there, and welcome back to the podcast, my friend. I'm Mano, and I'm absolutely thrilled you're here with me today. Before we jump into our main topic, I want to make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes that could genuinely transform the way you speak English and communicate with the world. If you've been finding this podcast helpful and it's been providing you with genuine value, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button and share this episode with someone you know who might benefit from learning how to speak English more confidently and fluently. Make sure you check out our entire podcast playlist to discover all the previous episodes we've created specifically to help you on your English speaking journey. There's an amazing collection of resources and lessons waiting for you there, so definitely go check that out after this episode wraps up. Also, if you're new here, welcome to the community. We're building something really special and I'm excited that you're joining us. Alright, let's dive into today's episode because what we're going to cover is genuinely life changing for your English speaking abilities. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest challenges that English learners face worldwide. And honestly, it's the thing that stops most people from ever becoming fluent speakers. You might understand English incredibly well when you're reading or listening, but the moment you need to open your mouth and actually speak, something happens. Your brain freezes, your confidence disappears. You start searching for words that seem to hide somewhere deep in your mind when you actually need them. This phenomenon is so incredibly common that if you've experienced it, you are in absolutely fantastic company. Millions of English learners around the world face this exact same challenge every single day. They can ace a test, they can understand a movie in English, but put them in a real conversation and suddenly they feel like they're back at square one, struggling to construct even a basic sentence without overthinking it completely. Here's what I want you to understand from the very beginning of this episode. The problem isn't that you don't know enough English. The problem isn't your vocabulary or your grammatical knowledge. The real issue is that your brain hasn't been trained properly to construct sentences in real time, on the fly, without needing to pause and think through every single word choice and grammatical structure. Think about it this way. When you speak your native language, you don't sit there and think about whether you're using the right verb tense or whether your sentence structure is grammatically perfect. You just open your mouth and the words flow out naturally because your brain has been trained through years and years of exposure and practice to do this automatically. The good news, and I really want to emphasize this, is that you can absolutely retrain your brain to do this same thing in English. It's not impossible, it's not beyond your reach. It just requires understanding the right techniques and then applying them consistently. And that's exactly what we're going to do together in this episode. I'm going to show you 10 incredibly practical techniques that have been proven to help English learners just like you develop the ability to form sentences quickly, naturally, and confidently. These aren't theory-based methods that sound good in a textbook but don't work in real life. These are practical, actionable strategies that you can start implementing today and begin seeing results almost immediately. But before we get into those specific techniques, let me explain why this whole issue happens in the first place. Understanding the root cause is actually really important because it helps you understand why these techniques work so effectively. When you're learning English in a traditional way, usually through textbooks or memorizing grammar rules, your brain is processing information in a very deliberate, conscious way. You're thinking about the rules, you're analyzing the structure, you're checking your work mentally before you speak. This is called controlled processing, and while it's useful for learning grammar, it's actually detrimental to fluency because it makes you slow. It makes you hesitant. It creates that pause where you're thinking about what to say instead of just saying it. Fluent speech, on the other hand, requires what's called automatic processing. Your brain needs to be able to construct sentences without consciously thinking about the process. It's like driving a car. When you first learn to drive, you're thinking about every single action, the steering wheel, the pedals, the mirrors. But once you've driven for a while, you can drive and have a conversation at the same time without consciously thinking about how to operate the vehicle. The same principle applies to speaking English fluently. Your brain needs to reach a point where it can automatically generate sentences without you consciously monitoring every word and grammatical choice. And the techniques we are going to cover today are specifically designed to help you make this transition from conscious, careful speech to automatic, fluent speech. So here's my promise to you as we go through this episode. By the time we are done, you're going to understand exactly how to train your brain to construct English sentences more quickly. You're going to know specific, practical techniques you can use immediately, and you're going to feel genuinely confident about putting these methods into practice in your own life. Let's get started with our first technique. Technique 1: Thinking in simple sentence structures. The first breakthrough technique we are going to explore is something I call thinking in simple sentence structures. Now I know this might sound almost too basic, and you might be thinking, Mano, I already know simple sentences. I want to learn how to speak in more complex, impressive sounding ways. But here's the thing that I need you to really understand. The biggest mistake that advanced learners make is trying to sound too impressive. They are constantly reaching for complex vocabulary and intricate grammatical structures because they think that's what fluent speakers do. But actually, fluent speakers, native speakers, they speak simply most of the time. They save the complex structures for situations where they are genuinely necessary. Let me give you some concrete examples of simple sentence structures that native English speakers use constantly in everyday conversation. I like coffee. I see that you're interested. She is happy about the result. He enjoys reading books. They love playing sports. We went to the market yesterday. It's raining outside right now. The food was delicious at that restaurant. Notice how straightforward these sentences are. There's no complex vocabulary. There's no intricate grammatical structure. They're simple, direct, and incredibly effective. And here's what's important. These simple sentences are your foundation. When you master the ability to construct these basic sentences automatically without thinking, you've actually gained something much more valuable than the ability to make complex sentences. Why? Because in real conversation, which is usually fast moving and spontaneous, you don't have time to be constructing complex sentences anyway. You need to be able to respond quickly, and the way you do that is by having an arsenal of simple sentence structures that you can deploy instantly. Think of these simple structures as your building blocks. Every more complex sentence you ever make is just a combination or expansion of these basic structures. So here's how you practice this technique. You're going to take simple subject-verb combinations and use them constantly. Your mind needs to get comfortable generating these kinds of sentences automatically. For instance, practice saying things like, I wake up early, I drink water, I go to work, I study English, I watch videos, I cook dinner, I relax in the evening. Simple, right? But the power is in the repetition and automaticity. What happens when you practice this consistently is that your brain starts to recognize that this is a reliable pattern it can fall back on in any situation. In conversation, when you're trying to respond quickly to something someone said, your brain automatically drops back to these simple structures because they are so well practiced. It's like having a safety net, but it's also your primary tool. Let me give you a practical situation where this matters enormously. Imagine you're in a conversation with someone and they ask you something you weren't expecting. Your brain might feel like it's panicking a little bit, but if you've internalized these simple structures, you can construct a response using them while you're buying yourself time to think about what else you want to say. You respond with something simple and it gives you that crucial moment to gather your thoughts. Here's another thing that happens when you practice thinking in simple structures. You become much clearer in your communication. Because you are not trying to express complex ideas in one sentence, each sentence you make communicates one clear idea. This actually makes you more understandable, not less. Native speakers appreciate clarity above all else. They would rather understand you perfectly with simple language than be confused by complicated language. I want you to start a practice right now where you dedicate time every single day to generating simple sentences. Pick a random noun or verb or activity and just start making sentences with it. Don't overthink it. Don't try to make them impressive. Just let them flow. If the noun is window, you might say, I see a window. The window is open. I closed the window. I opened it again. Simple, automatic, building your fluency muscle. One thing I notice with learners who really internalize this technique is that they begin to feel a sense of freedom in their speech. Instead of feeling constrained by trying to be grammatically perfect, they feel liberated by knowing they can always fall back on these simple, effective structures. And paradoxically, this actually leads to them becoming more fluent overall because they're not so focused on perfection. Technique 2. Mastering common sentence patterns. Now, building on that foundation of simple sentences, our second technique is all about recognizing and mastering the most common sentence patterns in English. You see, English, like all languages, follows certain patterns. Native speakers have internalized these patterns so deeply that they don't even think about them anymore. They just speak and the patterns flow naturally. What we are going to do is make these patterns explicit and conscious so that you can practice them until they become automatic for you as well. Let me break down the most fundamental patterns that make up probably 80% of everyday English conversation. The first pattern is the most basic one: subject plus verb plus object. This is the skeleton of most English sentences. The subject is the person or thing doing the action. The verb is the action. The object is the person or thing that the action is being done to. Examples: I eat pizza. She reads books. They watch movies. He drives a car. We enjoy sports. She plays guitar. I study languages. He works in finance. When you practice this pattern, you are literally practicing the most fundamental structure of English sentences. Get comfortable with this and you've got a huge percentage of the English language covered. Practice making dozens of sentences with this structure. Pick different subjects, different verbs, different objects, and just generate sentences constantly. The second important pattern is subject plus verb plus adjective. This pattern is used when you're describing how something is or how someone feels. The coffee is hot. The weather is sunny. They are happy. She is tired. I am excited. He is nervous. The book is interesting. We are ready. This pattern is crucial for expressing feelings, describing states, and providing information about what things are like. I want you to really practice this one because it's essential for having real conversations. In a real conversation, people are constantly asking you how you are, how things are going, how you feel about something. And you need to be able to respond quickly using this pattern. Practice generating dozens of sentences until this becomes automatic. I am tired. I am happy. I am confused. I am ready. I am interested. I am scared. I am comfortable. I am disappointed. The third vital pattern is subject plus verb plus preposition plus noun. This pattern allows you to talk about location, time, direction, and many other relationships between things. He walks to the store. She goes in the morning. I work at the office. They live near the beach. We study in the library. You travel on weekends. I sleep at night. She waits by the door. These sentences help you describe where things happen, when they happen, and how things relate to each other spatially. Once you've got these three core patterns down and they're becoming automatic, you can start layering in some variations and combinations. For instance, you can create sentences that combine multiple patterns. I am happy at the office. She is tired in the evening. They are excited about the trip. We are interested in the subject. Here's what's really important about mastering these patterns. Once they are automatic, once your brain recognizes them and can generate them without you consciously thinking about it, something magical starts to happen. Your brain has a framework. When someone asks you a question, your brain doesn't have to figure out from scratch how to construct a response. It can automatically slot the right information into the pattern. This is where your fluency starts to come from. Practice this by taking a sentence pattern and then generating as many variations as you can. For the subject plus verb plus object pattern, try I drink coffee, I eat breakfast, I study English, I watch movies, I learn languages, I enjoy sports, I read books, I clean my room, I visit friends, I paint pictures, I ride bikes, I cook dinner. See how the pattern is constant, but you're varying everything else? That's the practice that builds automaticity. Technique 3. The shadowing technique, advanced level. Alright, we are moving into one of the most powerful techniques that can literally transform your pronunciation, your rhythm, your intonation, and your overall speaking ability. This is something called shadowing, and if you haven't been doing this already, you need to start implementing it immediately. This technique alone has changed more English learners' speaking abilities than almost any other single technique. So, what exactly is shadowing? Shadowing is a technique where you listen to a native English speaker saying something and you immediately repeat it, mimicking not just the words but the tone, the rhythm, the stress patterns, and the overall flow of how they said it. The key word here is immediately. You're not waiting to hear the entire sentence and then repeating it from memory. You're basically speaking simultaneously with the speaker or just a tiny fraction of a second behind them, like your voice is casting a shadow of their voice. Let me explain why this is so incredibly powerful. When you shadow, several things happen simultaneously in your brain. First, your ears are being trained to perceive the sounds and rhythms of English. You're not just hearing the words in isolation, you're hearing them in context, with natural stress, natural rhythm, natural intonation. Your brain is absorbing all of this information. Second, your mouth is learning to produce these sounds and rhythms. You're actually practicing the physical act of speaking English, which is very different from just thinking about English or reading English. Your mouth muscles are learning the unfamiliar movements required to produce English sounds. This is crucial because if your mouth doesn't practice making these sounds, you'll have an accent. And more importantly, you might be hard to understand. Third, your brain is making connections between the sounds, the meanings of the words, and the patterns of the language. Instead of learning these things separately, they're all coming together in one integrated experience. When you combine listening, speaking, and meaning all at the same time, your brain makes much stronger connections. Here's how to practice shadowing effectively. Start with content that's not too fast, maybe a TED talk or a podcast or an interview where the speaker is articulate but not rushing. Listen to a sentence or maybe two sentences. Listen once to understand the meaning. Then listen again and try to speak along with the speaker, trying to match their pace, their rhythm, their intonation. Don't worry if you can't keep up perfectly at first. That's normal. The goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to train your brain and your mouth to gradually improve in synchronizing with native speakers. You'll be surprised how quickly you improve if you do this regularly. Here's something really important. When you are shadowing, don't just mumble along passively. Actually put effort into matching the speaker. Try to match their rhythm exactly. Try to match their stress patterns. Try to match their intonation. Pay attention to where they pause. Pay attention to which words they emphasize. All of this information is valuable. Let me give you a specific example. Imagine the speaker says, I think that learning languages is one of the most rewarding experiences you can have in your life. When you shadow this, you're noticing how they stress certain words. They probably stress learning, rewarding, and life more than other words. They probably pause slightly before one of the most. They might speed up or slow down at various points. When you shadow this carefully, you're training your brain to recognize and reproduce these patterns. One advanced version of shadowing is to record yourself shadowing and then listen back to compare your version with the original. This way, you can actually hear what you're doing well and what needs improvement. You can listen to your rhythm, your stress patterns, your pronunciation of individual words. This feedback is incredibly valuable. Another version is to shadow for a minute or two with the audio and then continue speaking about the same topic without the audio. So you're using the native speaker's voice and rhythm as a model, and then you're trying to continue in that same style. This bridges from pure shadowing to freestyle speaking, which is really useful. I recommend doing shadowing for at least 15 to 20 minutes every single day. Choose content that interests you. Maybe it's a podcast about something you care about or a video about a topic you find fascinating. Because if the content is interesting, you are much more likely to stick with the practice consistently. And consistency is absolutely key to making this technique work. Technique 4: Question and Answer Training. The fourth technique we are going to explore is question and answer training. This is incredibly practical because real conversations are fundamentally about asking and answering questions. And if you can get good at responding quickly to questions, you're basically learning how to have conversations, which is the ultimate goal. Here's how this technique works. You either have someone ask you questions in English, or you can use an app, or you can even ask yourself questions while looking in the mirror. The key is that you need to hear a question and respond to it as quickly as possible without overthinking. Your goal is not to give a perfect answer. Your goal is to give a quick answer, a natural answer, something that shows your brain is working in real time in English. Let me give you some examples of the kinds of questions you'd practice with. These should be questions you'd actually hear in a real conversation. What did you do today? Where are you from? What do you do for a living? How many languages do you speak? What do you like to do in your free time? Have you traveled anywhere interesting? What's your favorite food? What do you study? What makes you happy? Now, the key to this practice is that you're not stopping to think deeply about the answer. You're responding as naturally and quickly as possible. If someone asks you, "What did you do today?" you might answer, "I went to work, had lunch with a friend, and studied English for an hour." You're just speaking as it comes to you. You're not crafting the perfect response. Here's why this is so valuable. In a real conversation, especially with native speakers, people don't wait patiently for you to construct a perfect sentence. The conversation moves forward. If you pause too long, you lose your turn in the conversation. You seem hesitant or unsure. By practicing responding quickly to questions, you're training yourself to keep up with the pace of real conversation. Let me give you a specific example of how to practice this. I'll ask you a question and you should try to respond quickly, not worrying about perfection. Ready? What's your favorite thing to do on weekends? You might answer, "I really enjoy spending time with friends and family. We usually go to the park or try a new restaurant. Sometimes I stay home and just relax, which is nice too." That's a natural, quick response. It's not perfect, but it's real and communicative. When you practice this technique, I recommend doing it frequently, maybe 10 to 15 minutes a day. You can make a list of 20 or 30 common questions and then go through them regularly, answering quickly. Over time, certain patterns will emerge. You'll realize that many questions are actually variations of the same basic questions. Once you can answer the basic ones fluently, the variations become easier. Here's an advanced version of this technique. Instead of just answering the question, try to ask a follow-up question back. So if someone asks you, "What do you do for a living?" you might answer, "I work in software development." "And what about you? What's your profession?" This way, you're practicing both answering and asking questions, which makes it even more realistic. Another thing to note, when you're practicing question and answer training, try to use a mix of question types. Some should be about past events, past tense, "What did you do yesterday?" Some should be about present situations, present tense, "What are you doing right now?" Some should be about future plans, future tense, "What are you going to do next weekend?" By practicing different tenses, you're building flexibility in your responding ability. I also want to emphasize that making mistakes while practicing this is actually a good thing. If you make a mistake when you're practicing, you immediately learn. You correct yourself and you're not likely to make that mistake again. But if you're so afraid of making mistakes that you never practice, then you never have the opportunity to learn and improve. So embrace the mistakes. They're part of the learning process. One more thing about question and answer training. Pay attention to the natural phrases native speakers use when responding. Phrases like, "Well, actually," or "That's a good question," or "Let me think about that for a second." These are the kinds of things you hear in real conversations. When you start using these phrases naturally, your responses sound much more natural and native-like. Technique 5. The timer technique, building speed. Alright, let's talk about the fifth technique, which is something I call the timer technique. This is all about building speed and pushing your fluency to the next level by training your brain under time pressure. And I know that might sound a bit stressful, but actually it's incredibly effective. Here's how it works. You choose a random word or phrase, any word, maybe it's coffee or travel or happiness. Then you set a timer for 1 minute and you try to form as many different sentences as possible using that word in that 1 minute. You're speaking continuously, generating sentences as fast as you can. Why is this useful? Because it forces your brain to stop overthinking and start generating language automatically. When you're under time pressure, you don't have time to carefully construct each sentence and evaluate whether it's perfect. You just have to speak. And that's where real fluency comes from. Let me give you an example. Let's say the word is book. You set a timer for 1 minute and you start generating sentences. I love reading books. I bought a new book yesterday. The book is very interesting. She writes books for a living. They discuss books in the club. I need to finish my book. The library has many books. Books are expensive sometimes. I recommend that book to my friends. Have you read any good books lately? Books help us learn new things. The book has 300 pages. See how I'm just generating them rapidly without overthinking? What's happening neurologically during this exercise is really fascinating. Your brain is being forced to access your vocabulary and your grammatical knowledge without having time to consciously monitor itself. This is actually training the automatic processing that I mentioned earlier. You're basically reprogramming your brain to generate language faster. Here's how to structure your timer practice for maximum benefit. Start with common, relatively simple words. Words that you already know lots of associations with. As you get better at this, you can move to more challenging words, maybe abstract words or words that are less common. The idea is that you gradually increase the difficulty as you improve. I recommend doing this exercise for at least 10 to 15 minutes every single day. You can do 3 or 4 different words in a session. For each word, set a timer for 1 minute and just go as fast as you can. Try to beat your own record. Like if you made 10 sentences the first time with the word coffee, try to make 12 sentences the second time. This competitive element with yourself helps keep you motivated. Here's something really important. Don't worry about making mistakes during this exercise. If you mess up a sentence, just keep going. The goal is quantity and speed, not perfection. In fact, making mistakes is good because it means you're pushing your brain to work at its limits. That's where growth happens. One thing I notice with people who do this exercise consistently is that their spontaneous speaking ability improves dramatically because they've been training their brain to generate language under time pressure. When they're in a real conversation, which is also time pressured in a sense, they perform much better. Here's an advanced variation of the timer technique. Instead of just making simple sentences with the word, try to tell a story that incorporates the word. So, if the word is journey, you might say something like, I started my journey last year when I decided to learn English. It was a challenging journey because I didn't have much experience. But with dedication and consistent practice, my journey has been rewarding. Every day of my journey teaches me something new. I encourage everyone to start their own journey toward fluency. Another variation is to have someone else give you the word, so you don't have time to prepare mentally. You just hear the word and immediately start generating sentences. This is a bit more challenging but more realistic in terms of how real conversations work. I also like to combine the timer technique with other techniques. For example, after you finish your 1 minute timer challenge with a word, try to shadow a native speaker talking about that same word. So you're first generating language yourself, and then you're absorbing how a native speaker generates language about the same topic. This combination is really powerful. Technique 6. Memorizing common phrases for automatic response. Let's move on to our sixth technique, which is all about memorizing common phrases that native English speakers use constantly. Now, I know memorization might not sound like the most exciting thing, but trust me, this is incredibly practical and effective. Here's the thing about common phrases. Native speakers don't construct these phrases from scratch every single time they use them. They've heard them so many times that they've internalized them completely. The phrase just pops into their mind automatically. They don't think about the grammar or the structure, they just say it. When you memorize these phrases, you're training your brain to respond automatically in certain situations without needing to think about construction or grammar. This is huge for your fluency because suddenly, for those phrases, you have native like fluency. You sound natural. You sound like someone who actually speaks English. Let me give you some examples of these common phrases that come up in conversation all the time. How are you doing? I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. What do you think about that? I'm not sure about that. That sounds good to me. I couldn't agree more. Let me think about that. I see what you mean. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Can you help me with something? No problem at all. What time is it? Where are you from? Nice to meet you. Great to see you again. How's everything going? Everything's going well. These phrases are the glue of conversation. They keep conversations flowing. They express reactions and responses. And if you have these phrases memorized and automatic, you immediately sound more fluent and more native like. Here's how to build a bank of these phrases. Start by listening carefully to English speakers, maybe in podcasts, videos, or conversations. Every time you hear a phrase that comes up repeatedly, write it down. Keep a list. Then, over time, you memorize these phrases. I recommend memorizing about 10 to 15 new phrases every week. That way, over a few months, you have hundreds of these automatic phrases in your arsenal. Once you've written down a phrase, the way to memorize it is to practice saying it out loud multiple times. Maybe 10 or 20 times. Say it with different intonations. Say it fast, say it slowly. Record yourself saying it and listen back. The goal is to make this phrase feel so familiar that when you're in a real conversation and you need to use it, it just comes out automatically. Here's something important though. Don't just memorize the phrase in isolation. Try to understand the context in which it's used. Why do people say this phrase? When would you use it? Who would say it? Understanding the context makes the phrase more memorable and also makes sure you use it appropriately. For example, the phrase no problem at all is a response to someone asking you for help or apologizing for something. It reassures them that whatever they are asking for or whatever they did is not a burden to you. When you understand this context, you're much more likely to use the phrase correctly in a real situation. I also want to mention that many of these common phrases have variations. For example, how are you doing can be responded to with I'm doing great, I'm doing well, I'm doing fine, I'm doing pretty good, and so on. Learning the variations helps you sound more natural because you can choose different variations in different situations, just like native speakers do. Here's an exercise you can do right now. Think about your daily routine. You wake up, you eat breakfast, you go to work or school, you interact with people. For each of these situations, think of common phrases that get used. Write them down, memorize them. Then, start using them consciously when you're in these situations. Over time, they become automatic. For instance, when you're greeting someone at work, you might say, how are you doing today? And they respond with, I'm doing well, thanks for asking. How about you? You memorize this exchange. You practice it. Then, when you encounter this situation in real life, it comes out naturally without you having to think about it. One more thing about memorized phrases. They serve as confidence boosters. When you're in a conversation and you feel like you might get stuck, you can rely on these automatic phrases to keep the conversation flowing. This buys you time to think about what else you want to say. So they are not just about sounding fluent, they are also about maintaining confidence and momentum in conversations. Technique 7. Describing what you see, real-time narration. Technique number 7 is something I call describing what you see, and it's all about real-time narration of your environment. This is an incredibly practical technique because you can do it anywhere, anytime, with no special equipment needed. Here's the basic idea. You look around at whatever environment you're in and you start narrating what you see in English. You're speaking out loud, describing the physical objects, the people, the actions, the colors, the textures, everything that you observe. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're sitting in a coffee shop. You might narrate, I see a brown coffee cup on the table. There are pastries in the display case. A man is reading a newspaper by the window. The walls are painted a light green color. I hear the sound of coffee machines in the background. There are several people typing on their laptops. The lighting is quite bright because of the natural light from the windows. I smell fresh coffee all around me. Why is this exercise so valuable? Because you're training your brain to think about your environment directly in English without needing to mentally translate from your native language. This is huge. Most beginning and intermediate learners default to thinking in their native language and then translating to English, which is slow and unnatural. When you practice describing what you see directly in English, you're breaking that translation habit. Additionally, you're practicing descriptive language. You're using adjectives, you're using prepositional phrases, you're using a variety of sentence structures to communicate information about your environment. This builds your flexibility with language. Here's how to practice this. Set aside time every day, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, where you deliberately practice describing your environment. You can do it in different locations: your home, a cafe, a park, public transportation. Different environments offer different vocabulary and descriptive challenges, so this variety is good for your learning. When you describe, start with simple descriptions and gradually add more detail. First, you might say, I see a window, then expand. I see a large window. Expand again. I see a large window with white curtains. Expand further. I see a large window with white curtains that frame a beautiful view of the garden. This practice of gradually expanding descriptions is excellent because it trains you to build on what you've already said, which is a fundamental skill in extended speaking. Here's another variation of this technique. Choose a specific object and describe it in as much detail as possible. Pick something simple like a pen or a coffee cup. Then spend a few minutes describing everything about it: the color, the shape, the material, what it's used for, how you use it, memories associated with it. This detailed description forces you to access lots of different vocabulary and grammatical structures. Something interesting happens when you do this practice regularly. Your mind becomes more observant. You start noticing details about your environment that you might not have noticed before. And more importantly for language learning, you start thinking about how to describe these observations in English. This constant practice of describing creates new neural pathways in your brain that support English language thinking. I also recommend recording yourself doing this describing exercise. Speak your descriptions out loud and record them. Then listen back. You'll be surprised at how much you can learn just by listening to yourself. You'll hear places where you pause unnecessarily. You'll notice pronunciation issues. You'll see opportunities to use better vocabulary or more varied sentence structures. Technique 8. Breaking the mental translation barrier. Alright, we are getting to one of the most critical techniques, and honestly, this might be the most important thing I share with you today. This is all about breaking the mental translation barrier. This is the 8th technique, and I want to really emphasize how important this is. Most English learners have this habit where they think in their native language first and then they translate that thought into English. So someone asks them a question and they think of the answer in their native language and then they translate it to English. This process is slow, it's unnatural, it causes pauses in speech. It makes people sound halting and uncertain. Real fluency requires breaking this habit. Real fluency requires that you think directly in English. Your thoughts form in English, not in your native language. This is a huge shift, and it's not something that happens automatically. It requires deliberate practice. Here's how to think about this. When you see something, instead of your brain generating a thought in your native language that you then translate, you want your brain to generate a thought directly in English. For example, if you see a cat, instead of thinking cat in your native language and then translating it to the word cat in English, you want to think the word cat directly in English without any intermediate translation step. Now, I know this might sound abstract, so let me give you practical ways to train this. The first method is simple. When you're doing your describing exercise, really focus on not allowing yourself to think in your native language. Notice if you're translating. If you catch yourself translating, pause and try to just think the English word directly. Here's an exercise that's really effective. Look at an object and force yourself to say the word in English without thinking of the translation. See an apple, don't think apple in your native language and then say apple in English. Just see the apple and immediately think and say apple in English, skipping that middle step entirely. This might seem subtle, but the neurological difference is significant. When you think directly in English without that translation intermediary, your brain is literally using the English language areas of your brain. Over time, this creates stronger English language processing capabilities. Another powerful exercise is to think about your day directly in English. Maybe before bed, you think back through your day, but you think about it in English. Your internal monologue becomes English. You think, today I woke up at 7 in the morning. I had breakfast with my family. I went to work and had a productive day. In the evening, I studied English and watched a movie. This internal monologue practice is incredibly powerful because you're using language constantly throughout the day, not just during designated practice sessions. You're training your brain to use English as your default thinking language. I want to tell you about a personal realization that many learners have when they reach this point. When you finally stop translating and start thinking directly in English, something clicks. Suddenly, your speech becomes faster. It becomes more fluid. You sound more confident. It's because there's no longer that translation lag. Your thoughts can become speech almost immediately. To help you make this transition, try to expose yourself to English constantly. Listen to English podcasts, watch English videos, read English text. The more English your brain is exposed to, the more likely it is that English thoughts will form naturally in your brain. Also, when you're practicing any of these techniques, really focus on thinking directly in English. Don't allow yourself the crutch of translating. If you can't think of a word, instead of translating from your native language, try to describe it using words you know or move on to a different thought. This practice of staying within English, of not allowing yourself to break out into your native language or translation, is what trains your brain to think directly in English. Technique 9. Storytelling and narrative fluency. Now we are moving into technique number 9, which is all about storytelling. Storytelling is one of the most powerful ways to develop fluency because it forces you to link ideas together, to develop coherence, and to maintain the flow of language over an extended period. Here's the thing about storytelling. When you tell a story, you can't just make isolated sentences. You have to make sentences that connect to each other logically and chronologically. You have to maintain narrative coherence. You have to keep the listener interested. This is much more challenging than just answering a question or making a single statement, but it's also much more valuable for developing fluency. Let me give you an example of how to start with a very simple story. Yesterday, I went to the park. I saw a dog. The dog was playing with a ball. It was very happy. I watched for a few minutes and then went home. That's a complete story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's chronological. It's coherent. Now, once you can tell simple stories like this automatically, you can start expanding them. Yesterday, I went to the park with my friend Sarah. We wanted to enjoy the nice weather and get some exercise. When we arrived, we saw a large golden dog playing with a ball. The dog seemed very energetic and happy. Its owner was sitting on a bench watching it. We watched the dog play for a few minutes and then decided to walk around the park. We saw beautiful flowers and some interesting birds. After about an hour, we felt tired and went to a nearby cafe to have some coffee. See how the second story is much longer and more detailed? It's the same basic story, but it's expanded with more description, more explanation, more context. And that's exactly how storytelling practice should work. When you practice storytelling, start with the simple versions. Tell them repeatedly until they become automatic. Then gradually expand them, add more detail, add more description, use a wider variety of vocabulary and grammatical structures. Here's a specific way to structure your storytelling practice. Every day, tell yourself 3 stories. Maybe your first story is about something that happened today. Your second story is about something that happened recently, maybe last week. Your third story is about something from your past, maybe a significant event or experience. Tell these stories out loud, record them and listen back. See where you pause. See where you struggle to find words. See where you could expand with more detail. Here's an important tip for storytelling practice. Focus on making your stories interesting and engaging, not on making them grammatically perfect. Use a variety of sentence structures, but don't overthink the grammar. Just focus on communicating the story clearly and interestingly. One thing that's really powerful about storytelling is that it naturally requires you to use different tenses. When you tell a story, you often use past tense to describe events that happened, present tense for the current moment, and maybe conditional language if you're talking about possibilities. So, storytelling practice automatically gives you practice with varied tenses. Here's another valuable variation. Try telling the same story from different perspectives. Tell a story about something that happened from your perspective, then tell it from someone else's perspective. This forces your brain to think about the same events in different ways and to construct the narrative differently. You can also try adding dialogue to your stories. Tell a story and include what the people in the story said. I went to the restaurant and the waiter asked, "How many people?" I said, "Just two, please." He said, "Follow me." He took us to a table by the window. Adding dialogue makes stories more interesting and also gives you practice with different types of sentence structures. I also recommend listening to how native English speakers tell stories. Notice how they use transition words like so, then, after that, meanwhile. Notice how they build suspense or interest in their stories. Notice how they use varied sentence lengths and structures to create rhythm. When you start paying attention to these things, you can incorporate them into your own storytelling. Technique 10. Practicing with real people. Finally, we get to our 10th technique, and this is really the capstone of everything we've been discussing. This is practicing with real people. No matter how much solo practice you do, nothing can replace the value of actually speaking with real human beings in real conversations. Here's why this is so crucial. When you practice alone, you have complete control. You can pause, you can repeat, you can go at your own pace. When you practice with other people, especially native speakers, you don't have that control. The conversation moves at its own pace. People might ask unexpected questions. People might use vocabulary you haven't heard before. You have to adapt and respond in real time. This real world pressure is exactly what develops true conversational fluency. It's in the real interaction with real stakes that your brain really shifts into that automatic processing mode we've been talking about. There are several ways to practice with real people. The first is to find a language exchange partner. This is usually someone who wants to learn your native language and you want to learn their native language. So you help each other. You might spend half the time speaking English and half the time speaking their native language. This arrangement is great because both people benefit. You can find language exchange partners online through various apps and websites. You can also find them locally, maybe through language meetup groups. The advantage of local groups is that you can meet in person, which often leads to more natural conversations. Another option is to hire a tutor or take a class. The advantage of this is that you have someone who is specifically trained to help you with your English learning. A good tutor can correct your mistakes, provide guidance, and structure your practice in ways that support your learning goals. If you don't have access to a tutor or language exchange partner, you can still practice with other people. Maybe you have friends or family members who speak English. Even if they are not native speakers, practicing together can be valuable. Or you can find online communities where English learners practice together. When you're practicing with real people, here's what I recommend you focus on. First, don't be afraid to speak. Many people are so worried about making mistakes that they don't say anything at all. That's counterproductive. Your goal isn't to be perfect. Your goal is to communicate. Make mistakes if you need to. People are generally understanding and patient with language learners. Second, try to actively participate in the conversation. Don't just answer questions, ask questions too. Take the conversation where you want it to go. This active participation is what builds your confidence and your ability to handle the unpredictability of real conversation. Third, be honest about your level. If you don't understand something, say so. Ask the person to repeat or to explain in a different way or to speak more slowly. Real conversations involve this kind of back and forth clarification all the time. You are not failing if you need to ask for clarification. You're just being a good communicator. Fourth, pay attention to how native speakers handle the conversation. How do they transition between topics? What phrases do they use? How do they handle misunderstandings? You can learn a lot just by observing and absorbing how native speakers actually communicate, not just how textbooks say you should communicate. Here's something I want to emphasize. When you practice with other people, you're not just learning language, you're also building confidence. Each time you have a successful conversation, each time you manage to communicate your ideas, you become more confident. And confidence is a huge part of fluency. Someone who speaks with confidence sounds more fluent, even if they make grammatical mistakes, than someone who speaks hesitantly and uncertainly, even if their grammar is perfect. Alright, so we've gone through all 10 techniques individually, but the real power comes when you start combining these techniques. Instead of doing just one technique, you weave multiple techniques together into your daily practice. Here's a sample daily practice routine that combines multiple techniques. In the morning, you do 10 minutes of timer practice. You pick a word, set a timer for 1 minute, and generate as many sentences as you can. Then you do it with 2 more different words. This gets your brain warmed up and in English mode. After that, you do 10 minutes of shadowing. You pick a podcast or video and you shadow along with the speaker. You're matching their rhythm, their intonation, their pace. This trains your ear and your mouth. Then you do 10 minutes of describing what you see. You look around your environment and describe it in English. You're training your brain to think directly in English without translation. In the evening, you might do 10 minutes of question and answer practice. You ask yourself or have someone ask you common questions and you respond quickly. This keeps your spontaneous speaking skills sharp. And then, maybe twice a week, you find time to practice with a real person, either through a language exchange, a class, or a conversation with a friend. This is where everything comes together in real-world interaction. The beauty of this system is that each technique addresses different aspects of fluency. The timer technique builds speed. Shadowing builds natural pronunciation and rhythm. Describing builds thinking directly in English. Question and answer builds quick response. And practicing with real people builds conversational confidence. When you combine all of these techniques consistently, you develop comprehensive fluency. You're not just getting better at one aspect of speaking, you're improving across all the dimensions that make up fluent, confident English speaking. Benefit 1. Eliminating hesitation and pauses. Now that we understand the techniques, let's talk about what actually happens when you implement these techniques consistently. And the first major benefit is that you stop hesitating when you speak. That tendency to pause and search for words, it starts disappearing. When you practice forming sentences using simple structures and patterns every single day, your brain starts to recognize these structures as reliable. They become like neural highways in your brain. When you're in a conversation and you need to respond, your brain doesn't have to think about how to construct the sentence. It just follows the familiar pathway and produces the sentence automatically. Think of it like driving. When you first learn to drive, you're thinking about every single action. But after you've driven for a while, your brain can produce all these driving actions automatically while you're having a conversation with someone. The same thing happens with language. When you practice forming sentences until the structures are automatic, you can produce sentences while your attention is focused on the content of what you're saying, not on the mechanics of producing the sentences. This elimination of hesitation has a profound effect on how you come across to other people. When you speak without hesitating, you sound confident. You sound like someone who knows what they're talking about. People respond positively to this confidence. They are more likely to understand you. They are more likely to continue the conversation. They are more likely to take you seriously. The irony is that you might be making mistakes, but if you're producing them confidently, without hesitation, people often don't even notice the mistakes. Benefit 2. Building unshakable confidence. The second major benefit is that you develop genuine, deep confidence in your ability to speak English. This isn't surface level confidence. This is real, grounded confidence that comes from knowing that you can handle speaking in English in various situations. Where does this confidence come from? It comes from experience and success. Every time you use one of these techniques, you're creating a success experience. You're making sentences, you're completing speaking tasks, you're interacting with people. Each of these experiences adds to your confidence. Imagine the difference in how you feel after spending a month using these techniques versus before you started. At the beginning, the idea of having a conversation with a native English speaker might make you nervous. But after a month of consistent practice with the techniques, especially if you've been practicing with real people, you start to believe in yourself. You know you can do this. This confidence then spills over into other areas of your life. You're more likely to take opportunities to use English. You're more likely to apply for jobs that require English. You're more willing to travel to English speaking countries. You're more open to making English speaking friends because you're no longer limited by doubt and fear. You actually believe in your ability. Benefit 3. Achieving fluent, natural speech. The third major benefit is that you actually achieve fluent, natural speech. You start to sound like someone who thinks in English and communicates in English naturally, not like someone who's translating word by word. Remember how we talked about mental translation being a barrier to fluency? When you practice the techniques we've discussed, you're moving away from translation and moving toward direct English thinking. And this has a massive effect on how natural your speech sounds. Native speakers can usually tell within a few sentences whether someone is speaking a language naturally or whether they are translating. And the difference isn't always about grammar or vocabulary. It's about fluency, about rhythm, about the way ideas flow together. When you practice shadowing and storytelling and thinking directly in English, you gradually start to absorb the rhythms and patterns of natural English speech. This is something that really resonates with learners. They say things like, I didn't realize it, but I'm starting to think in English sometimes. And when I do, the words come out so much faster and more naturally. That's what we're aiming for. That's the goal. That's when you know the techniques are really working. Benefit 4. Improved listening and comprehension. The fourth major benefit is that your listening and comprehension skills improve significantly. Now, you might be thinking, wait, I'm focusing on speaking. Why would my listening improve? But these skills are deeply connected. When you practice shadowing, you're training your ears to perceive the sounds, stress patterns, and rhythms of English. You're learning to pick up on subtle cues about meaning that are conveyed through intonation and stress. Over time, your listening becomes more acute. You can understand English that's spoken quickly. You can pick up on accents and different speaking styles. Additionally, when you're practicing any of these speaking techniques, you're exposing yourself to English. You're hearing English, processing English, thinking about English. All of this exposure improves your overall comprehension. There's also a neurological connection between speaking and listening. When you practice speaking, you're activating the same brain regions involved in understanding speech. So as you improve your speaking, your brain is also improving its ability to understand speech. This improvement in listening has practical benefits. You can understand movies and shows in English better. You can understand podcasts and audiobooks better. You can understand native speakers in real conversations better. And all of this makes you a better communicator. Benefit 5. Faster mental processing. The fifth benefit is that your brain actually processes language faster. When you practice the timer technique, when you force yourself to generate language quickly, you're literally training your brain to work faster with language. This has implications beyond just speaking. Your brain becomes quicker at language in general. You can read faster. You can listen and comprehend faster. You can think about language faster. This mental speed is something that native speakers have, but that second language learners often lack. Through practice, you can develop it. What does this feel like in real life? It feels like you can keep up in conversations better. You're not always a step behind, trying to catch up with what people said. You're able to process what they said and formulate a response in real time, at roughly the same pace they're speaking. Benefit 6. Improved pronunciation and intonation. The sixth major benefit is that your pronunciation and intonation improve significantly. When you practice shadowing, when you listen carefully to how native speakers pronounce words and inflect their sentences, you're training your brain and your mouth to produce these sounds and intonations. Many learners neglect pronunciation because they think as long as people understand me, it doesn't matter if my accent is strong. But actually, pronunciation and intonation affect comprehension significantly. When your pronunciation is clearer, people understand you better. When your intonation is more natural, people comprehend your meaning more easily, especially subtle meanings and implications. Additionally, there's a psychological component. When you speak with better pronunciation and more natural intonation, you feel more confident. You're less self-conscious about how you sound. This confidence then makes your overall communication more effective. Benefit 7. Real communication confidence. The seventh major benefit is that you develop genuine confidence in real communication situations. This is the difference between feeling confident in a practice setting and actually being able to use English in real world situations. When you practice with real people, especially in varied situations, you start to believe that you can actually handle English in the real world. You might have a conversation with a native speaker and not understand something, so you ask them to repeat, and they do, and you understand. You've successfully navigated a real communication problem. That's an experience that builds real confidence. You might find yourself in a situation where you have to use English, and you realize you can do it. Maybe you order food at a restaurant in English. Maybe you ask for directions. Maybe you have a conversation with a stranger. These real-world successes cement your confidence in a way that practice alone cannot. Benefit 8. Mental shift to English thinking. The eighth major benefit is that you make a fundamental mental shift from thinking in your native language to thinking directly in English. This is huge. This is one of the most important transformations in your journey to fluency. When you stop translating, when you stop having that intermediary step between thought and speech, everything changes. Your speech becomes faster. It becomes more natural. It becomes more confident. You're no longer limited by your ability to translate quickly. You're operating directly in English. This mental shift also affects how you dream, how you think about problems, how your unconscious mind works. Over time, English becomes not just a language you use in certain contexts. It becomes a language your mind uses constantly. Benefit 9. Freedom to express yourself fully. The ninth benefit is that you gain the freedom to express yourself fully. When you are still struggling to construct sentences, you can only express very simple thoughts. But as you develop fluency, you can express increasingly complex thoughts, nuances, emotions, and ideas. This freedom to express yourself is profound. Language isn't just about communication. It's about expressing who you are, your thoughts, your feelings, your creativity. When you can do that in English, you open up entirely new possibilities in your life. You can write in English, you can create content in English, you can have deep conversations in English. You can express the full complexity of your personality and mind in English. Benefit 10. A sense of real accomplishment. The 10th and final benefit is that you experience a genuine sense of accomplishment and progress. You look back at where you started and where you are now, and you can see the dramatic improvement. You went from struggling to form basic sentences to expressing yourself fluently. This sense of accomplishment is deeply motivating. It makes you want to continue improving. It builds momentum. Each success leads to the next success. And eventually, you reach a point where you're not even thinking about English learning anymore. You're just speaking English, naturally and confidently, as part of your life. Choosing your path. Alright, so we've covered the 10 techniques. We've talked about the amazing benefits. Now let's talk about how to actually implement this in your life. How do you get started? What does this look like in practice? The first step is to choose a technique to start with. I generally recommend that if you're relatively new to speaking English, start with technique number 1. Thinking in simple sentence structures. Write down some short, simple sentences using basic subject-verb structures. Practice saying them out loud multiple times a day until they feel very natural. Building your foundation with simple structures. Spend about 2 weeks focusing primarily on simple sentence structures. During this time, spend about 15 to 20 minutes every day working with simple sentences. Maybe have a notebook where you write down simple sentences. Or maybe use flashcards. Or maybe you just make up sentences on the fly and say them out loud. The important thing is that you're practicing creating and saying these simple sentences repeatedly until they become automatic. During these 2 weeks, you can include a little bit of other practices, but keep your focus primarily on simple structures. Maybe spend 5 minutes with common sentence patterns. Maybe spend 5 minutes describing what you see. But the majority of your practice time should be on simple sentence structures. After these 2 weeks, you should feel much more comfortable with basic sentence construction. You should be able to say a variety of simple sentences without thinking too hard about it. When you reach this point, you're ready to move to the next level, progressing to sentence patterns. Now that you have a solid foundation with simple sentence structures, spend about 2 to 3 weeks focusing on common sentence patterns. We discussed 3 main patterns: subject plus verb plus object, subject plus verb plus adjective, and subject plus verb plus preposition plus noun. Create lists of sentences using each pattern. Write them down. Say them out loud repeatedly. Try to make dozens of sentences with each pattern until you can generate them automatically. What you're looking for is a point where you don't have to think about the pattern anymore. You can just generate a sentence without consciously thinking about whether it follows the pattern. When you reach that point for all 3 patterns, you're developing serious foundational fluency. Incorporating shadowing into your routine. After a month of solid practice with simple structures and patterns, add shadowing to your routine. Spend about 15 to 20 minutes every day shadowing a native English speaker. Pick content that's interesting to you and not too fast. Podcast content is usually perfect for this. As you add shadowing, don't drop the previous techniques. Keep doing your simple sentence structure practice, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes a day, and keep working with sentence patterns. What you're building now is a routine that incorporates multiple techniques. This is where the real power comes in because you're addressing different aspects of fluency simultaneously. Adding real-time interaction. After you've been practicing for a couple of months with the previous techniques, add real-time interaction with people. This might be a language exchange partner. It might be an online class. It might be conversation practice with friends. Start with 1 conversation per week if that's all you can manage. Don't feel like you need to have conversations every day from the start. 1 quality conversation per week is better than 5 rushed, stressful conversations per week. Use your conversation time to practice what you've been learning with the other techniques. Try to use the sentence patterns you've been practicing. Try to tell stories. Try to respond quickly to questions. Structuring a daily practice routine. Let me give you a sample structure for a complete daily practice routine once you've worked through all the techniques. You can adjust this based on your schedule and your preferences, but this gives you an idea of how to structure things. Morning session, 20 to 30 minutes. Start with the timer technique. Pick 1 or 2 words and spend a few minutes with each, generating sentences rapidly. This gets your brain warmed up and in English mood. It's energizing and motivating. Midday or afternoon session, 15 to 20 minutes. Do some shadowing. Listen to an English speaker and shadow along. Focus on matching their pronunciation, stress, and rhythm. This is meditative and improves your listening and speaking simultaneously. Evening session 15 to 20 minutes. Do a combination of describing what you see and question and answer practice. Spend 10 minutes describing your environment or an environment you imagined. Spend 10 minutes asking yourself questions or having someone ask you questions and responding quickly. Once or twice per week, have a conversation in English, either with a language exchange partner in a class or with a friend who speaks English. Make these conversations meaningful. Don't just make small talk. Try to have real conversations about things that interest you. Additionally, throughout the day, practice thinking directly in English. When you're doing something, narrate your activities to yourself in English. When you see something, name it in English without translating. Practice your memorized phrases in situations where they apply. Overcoming common obstacles. Now, as you're implementing these techniques, you're probably going to encounter some obstacles. Let me address some of the most common ones that learners face. The first obstacle is running out of motivation or consistency. You start with lots of enthusiasm, but after a few weeks, the motivation fades. You miss practice days, you skip sessions, then you feel guilty and discouraged. Here's my advice for this. First, understand that this is completely normal. Every single person who's ever learned a language has gone through this. You're not failing, you're just experiencing a natural part of the learning process. To address this, focus on building habits rather than relying on motivation. A habit is something you do automatically because it's part of your routine, not because you feel motivated to do it. Just like you brush your teeth every morning without needing motivation, you can make English practice an automatic part of your day. The way to build habits is through consistency and anchoring. Pick a specific time of day for your practice and do it at that same time every single day. Maybe you practice right after breakfast. Maybe you practice before bed. Maybe you practice during your commute. Whatever works for your schedule. The key is doing it at the same time so it becomes part of your routine. Also, remember your why. Why are you learning English? Is it to advance your career? To travel? To connect with people? To enjoy media in English? Whatever your reason, remind yourself of it regularly. This intrinsic motivation will help carry you through the times when your enthusiasm flags. The second obstacle is perfectionism. You're practicing and you make mistakes and you feel discouraged. You think you should be further along. You compare yourself to others who seem to be progressing faster. Here's what I want to tell you. Making mistakes while practicing is actually a good thing. It means you're pushing your boundaries, you're challenging yourself. If you're never making mistakes, you're not practicing hard enough. You're in your comfort zone. Release the idea that you need to be perfect. Your goal is to communicate, not to be grammatically flawless. Native speakers make mistakes all the time. They use filler words. They restart sentences. They use slang and informal grammar. What matters is that they communicate clearly and confidently. Also, understand that language learning is not a linear process. You don't improve a little bit every single day. Sometimes you feel like you're making huge progress. Sometimes you feel like you're stalled. But over weeks and months and years, the overall trajectory is upward. The third obstacle is not having enough time. You're busy. You have work, family, responsibilities. How can you fit in daily English practice? Here's the thing. You don't need to spend 3 hours a day on English practice. Even 10 to 15 minutes of focused, deliberate practice every single day will produce results. Consistency matters more than duration. And there are ways to incorporate English into your existing activities. Listen to English podcasts while you commute. Watch English content while you're eating meals. Narrate your activities to yourself in English. Describe your environment. These things don't require additional time. You're just changing what you're doing with time you're already spending. The fourth obstacle is not having anyone to practice with. You want to practice with a real person, but you don't have access to a language exchange partner, or you can't afford a tutor. There are lots of options available today. There are free language exchange websites where you can find partners. There are communities of English learners online where you can practice together. There are teachers on platforms like italki or Verbling who offer affordable lessons. If you're willing to look, you can usually find something. But even if you can't find a practice partner, you can still practice with yourself. Record yourself speaking and listen back. Ask yourself questions and answer them out loud. Narrate your day. These solo practices are valuable. They are not as valuable as practicing with real people, but they are still useful. The fifth obstacle is self-doubt. You doubt whether you can really achieve fluency. You doubt whether these techniques work. You hear yourself speaking and you think, I sound so unnatural. I'll never sound like a native speaker. Here's what I want you to know. First, these techniques work. They've been proven to work for thousands of learners. They work because they are based on how language learning actually happens in the brain. They are not magic, but they are effective. Second, you don't need to sound like a native speaker. Fluency doesn't mean sounding like you were born speaking English. Fluency means being able to communicate effectively and confidently. Many non-native speakers are fluent in English but have an accent or use non-native grammar occasionally, and people understand them perfectly and respect their communication. Third, as you improve, you will sound increasingly natural. It doesn't happen overnight, but it happens. You'll re-listen to recordings of yourself from months ago and be amazed at how much your natural sound has improved. The sixth obstacle is feeling isolated in your learning. You're the only English learner among your friends. Nobody around you understands what you're going through. Nobody gets the challenges you're facing. This is where finding a community can really help. There are online communities of English learners all over the world. You can find groups on Facebook, Reddit, Discord, and many other platforms. Connecting with other learners who are going through the same process as you is incredibly validating and motivating. Additionally, as you practice with real people through language exchange, you start to build relationships with other people who speak English or are also learning English. These relationships can be really meaningful and supportive. Creating your customized practice plan. Now let's create a customized practice plan for you. I want you to be really specific about this so that you can actually implement it. First, assess your current level. Are you a beginner, intermediate, or advanced English speaker? What are your biggest challenges? Do you struggle with sentence construction, with pronunciation, with understanding quickly? Your assessment will determine which techniques you should prioritize. Second, identify your schedule. How much time can you realistically dedicate to English practice every day? Be honest with yourself. It's better to commit to 15 minutes a day that you'll actually do than to commit to an hour a day that you'll abandon after a week. Third, identify your resources. What content can you access? Podcasts, YouTube videos, apps, books, conversation partners? Your resources will determine which techniques you focus on first. Fourth, set specific goals. Not vague goals like improve my English, but specific goals like be able to have a 5-minute conversation without pausing, or use the timer technique for 15 minutes every day for 3 months, or memorize 20 new phrases every week. Fifth, create a weekly schedule. Write down specifically what you'll practice each day of the week and when you'll practice. Be as specific as possible. Instead of practice speaking, write 7 to 7:15 a.m. timer technique with random words from my word list. Sixth, create systems to track your progress. Keep a journal of your practice. Record yourself regularly so you can listen back and hear your improvement. Note when you have successful conversations. These records of progress are incredibly motivating. Measuring your progress. As you practice with these techniques, you want to be able to see and measure your progress. This is important for motivation and for understanding what's working. Here are some ways to measure progress. First, record yourself speaking at the beginning of your learning journey. Then record yourself again after a month of practice. Listen to both recordings and compare. You'll be able to hear improvements in your fluency, your pronunciation, your confidence. This is one of the most convincing ways to see your own progress. Second, Track your performance on specific exercises. With the timer technique, track how many sentences you can make in 1 minute with a given word. Over weeks and months, you should be able to make more and more sentences in the same time frame. That's progress. Third, practice with the same conversation partner regularly and notice how the conversations become easier and more fluent. At first, you might struggle and need lots of pauses and explanations. Over time, the conversation flows more naturally. Fourth, reflect on real world experiences. Can you understand English in movies better than you could before? Can you participate more confidently in conversations? Can you express more complex thoughts? These are signs of real progress. Expanding your practice. As you progress and these techniques become more natural, you can start expanding your practice to more challenging contexts. Maybe you start watching movies in English without subtitles. Maybe you start reading books or articles in English. Maybe you start having longer conversations with more challenging topics. The key is to always be challenging yourself slightly beyond your current comfort level. If you're only doing things you can already do easily, you're not pushing yourself to improve. But if you're always overwhelmed and frustrated, that's also not productive. The sweet spot is just slightly beyond your comfort zone. This is sometimes called the zone of proximal development. It's the area where you're challenged but not overwhelmed. Your brain is working hard but not giving up. This is where learning happens fastest. Simple sentence structures. Let me go deeper into technique number 1 so you really understand how to apply it in practice. Simple sentence structures are the foundation of everything, so it's worth spending time really understanding this technique deeply. The basic structure we are talking about is subject plus verb. This is the simplest possible sentence. I run. She speaks. They dance. He laughs. We sing. You smile. These are complete sentences with just a subject and a verb. When you practice with this structure, you are creating neural pathways in your brain that allow you to automatically generate sentences. Spend 10 minutes a day just making sentences with different subjects and different verbs. I wake up. I eat breakfast. I go to work. I study. I rest. I sleep. She works. She reads. She plays. She cooks. They exercise. They learn. They work. They travel. Once you are comfortable with subject plus verb sentences, expand to subject plus verb plus object. This is still simple, but it's giving you more to work with. I eat food. I read books. I watch movies. I enjoy sports. She drinks coffee. She loves music. She drives cars. He speaks English. He learns languages. He teaches students. Then expand to subject plus verb plus adjective. I am happy. I am tired. I am ready. She is beautiful. She is intelligent. She is kind. They are excited. They are nervous. They are confident. The key to practicing these structures is repetition and variety. You want to practice the same structure many times, but with different subjects, different verbs, different objects, different adjectives. This way, your brain builds a flexible understanding of the structure, not just a rote memory of specific sentences. I recommend creating lists of words, a list of subjects: I, you, he, she, it, we, they, my friend, the cat, the teacher. A list of common verbs: go, eat, read, speak, write, think, feel, make, want, like. A list of objects: food, books, movies, music, languages, friends, time, money. Then, during your practice time, pick a subject from your list, a verb, and an object, and make a sentence. Keep doing this, picking different combinations, generating sentences continuously for 10 minutes. At first, you'll be very conscious of the process. You'll be thinking, I'm picking subject plus verb plus object and making a sentence. But over time, as you practice consistently, this becomes automatic. You just generate sentences without thinking about the structure. This is the kind of automaticity that leads to fluency. Because in a real conversation, you don't have time to think about structure. You just open your mouth and the words come out. But for them to come out quickly and naturally, your brain needs to have practiced this structure thousands of times until it's completely automatic. Sentence patterns in context. Now, let's go deeper into technique number 2. Sentence patterns are the frameworks that English uses to communicate different types of information. Understanding patterns helps your brain organize language more efficiently. We talked about the subject plus verb plus object pattern. Let me give you more examples and different contexts where this pattern appears. In grocery stores, I bought apples, I selected bread, I chose milk. In conversations, she asked questions, he gave answers, they shared ideas. In daily activities, I brushed my teeth, I cleaned my room, I finished my work. In relationships, I love my family, she helped her friend, they supported each other. Notice how the same grammatical pattern is used in all these different contexts. This is the power of patterns. Once your brain recognizes the pattern, it can apply it in unlimited contexts. The subject plus verb plus adjective pattern is used primarily for describing states and attributes. Emotions. I am sad. She is happy. They are nervous. Physical descriptions. The coffee is hot. The weather is cold. The room is dark. States of being. He is sick. I am ready. We are prepared. Mental states. I am confused. She is interested. They are excited. The subject plus verb plus preposition plus noun pattern is used for location, time, direction, and manner. Location. I live in the city. She works at the office. They study in the library. Time. I work during the day. He sleeps at night. She practices in the morning. Direction. I walked toward the park. She ran away from the accident. They drove to the beach. Manner. I speak with confidence. She acted with caution. They behaved with respect. When you understand these patterns deeply, you can generate infinitely many sentences. You are not memorizing individual sentences. You are internalizing the pattern and then applying it creatively in different situations. Mastering shadowing technique. Let me give you much more detail about how to actually master the shadowing technique, because this is one of the most powerful tools available to you. First, choosing your material. You want material that's engaging enough to keep you interested, but not so fast or so complex that you completely can't keep up. TED Talks are often good because the speakers are articulate and relatively clear, even though they're native speakers. Podcasts that are about topics you care about are great. YouTube videos where you enjoy the content work well. Avoid material that's too fast, like movies or TV shows with lots of dialogue and rapid scene changes. Avoid material that's too slow or artificial, like language learning materials specifically designed for learners, because you want to hear natural English. Once you've chosen your material, here's how to practice. Listen to one or two sentences. Just listen, get the meaning. Don't try to repeat yet. Your first job is understanding. Then, play those same sentences again, and this time, try to speak simultaneously with the speaker. You are speaking at the same time they are speaking. You might be a syllable or two behind them, which is fine. The key is trying to match their pace and their rhythm. Don't worry if you can't catch every word. Especially at first, you might only catch maybe 70% of what the speaker is saying. That's okay. You're focusing on the overall rhythm and flow, and you're picking up what you can. As you do this repeatedly, something interesting happens. Your brain starts to fill in the gaps. You start catching more of the words. Your ability to shadow improves. It gets easier. Your brain and mouth synchronize better with the native speaker. Do this for 10 to 15 minutes at a time. Then take a break. Your brain needs time to process what you've practiced. Here's an advanced technique. After you've shadowed for a while, play the audio again, but this time without trying to shadow. Just listen and see how much you understand now. You'll probably understand significantly more than you did before the shadowing practice. because your brain has been activated and tuned into English. Another advanced technique is to shadow without the script. If you have a transcript of what's being said, don't look at it while you're shadowing. You want to be shadowing based on listening, not reading. This trains your ear more effectively. After you've shadowed with audio, record yourself and play it back. Compare your version with the original. Listen for differences in pronunciation, stress, intonation, rhythm. This feedback helps you adjust and improve. Mastering question and answer. Let me give you more detail on the question and answer technique because this is so important for developing conversational fluency. First, building your question bank. Write down the questions you think you'll encounter in real conversations. Common questions about yourself. What's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? How old are you? What's your hobby? What languages do you speak? Questions about activities. What did you do today? What are you doing right now? What are you going to do tomorrow? What do you like to do in your free time? Questions about preferences. What's your favorite food? What do you like to watch? What's your favorite book? Questions about experiences. Have you traveled anywhere? Have you learned any new skills? Have you met any interesting people? Write these questions down. Create a document or flashcards with all these questions. Now, start practicing answering them. Set a timer for 1 minute. Have someone read the questions to you or read them yourself one at a time. Answer each question as quickly as possible. Don't overthink. Just respond naturally. The goal is speed and spontaneity, not perfection. Track how many questions you can answer in 1 minute. As you practice, you should be able to answer more questions in the same time because you're getting faster at responding. Here's something important. Some of the questions you'll be able to answer easily because they are about things you've thought about before. But some questions might be harder. Maybe you haven't really thought about the answer. Push yourself to answer even the difficult questions quickly. This is where growth happens, in responding to questions you haven't fully prepared for. After you've answered a question, extend your answer. Don't just give a one word or one sentence answer. Give a few sentences. Give some explanation. Give some detail. This practice of extending answers helps you develop the ability to have longer conversations. For example, if the question is, "What do you do?" Don't just answer, "I work in finance." Answer something like, "I work in finance. I analyze financial data and help companies make business decisions. I've been doing this for about 5 years. I really enjoy the problem-solving aspect of the work." Here's another advanced technique. After answering a question, ask the questioner a follow-up question back. This makes the practice more like a real conversation where both people are participating. Timer technique for maximum benefit. Let me go deeper into the timer technique because this is such a powerful tool for building fluency quickly. The basic structure is pick a word, set a timer for 1 minute, generate as many sentences as you can using that word. But there are lots of variations and ways to intensify this practice as you get better. When you first start, pick simple concrete words. Words that you have lots of associations with. Coffee, dog, book, house, friend, work, school. These are words you can easily make many sentences about. As you get better, move to more challenging words. Abstract words. Happiness, freedom, responsibility, opportunity. Less common words. Architecture, philosophy, innovation. Specific topic words. Democracy, climate, technology. As you become advanced with this technique, try making sentences with a specific grammatical structure. Set your timer and try to make as many past tense sentences as you can with your chosen word, or future tense, or questions. This variation helps you practice specific grammatical structures under time pressure. Another variation is to make sentences that incorporate specific vocabulary from something you are studying. If you are studying travel vocabulary, set a timer and try to make as many sentences as you can about traveling using your chosen word. Here's a way to make this even more challenging. Pick 2 words instead of one. Your challenge is to make as many sentences as possible that use both words. If your 2 words are coffee and morning, you might make sentences like, "I drink coffee every morning. I enjoy coffee in the morning. The morning coffee smells wonderful." As you practice the timer technique, you're building mental speed and flexibility with language. Your brain becomes faster at accessing vocabulary and constructing sentences. This speed translates directly to more fluent conversation. Advanced memority techniques. Let me give you much more detail on how to memorize phrases effectively because this is a skill that many learners overlook. First, identify which phrases you actually need. Don't try to memorize every phrase in English. Focus on the phrases that actually come up in real conversations. Listen to English speakers or read transcripts of conversations and note the phrases that repeat. Write these phrases down. Create a dedicated list or a flashcard set. Leave space for your own example sentences using these phrases. Once you have your phrase list, here's how to memorize them effectively. Read the phrase out loud. Say it multiple times. Record yourself saying it and listen back. The goal is for the phrase to be so familiar that it comes out of your mouth automatically without you thinking about it. For each phrase, create example sentences that show how the phrase is used in context. For the phrase, that sounds good, you might have example sentences like, that sounds good to me. That sounds good, let's do it. That sounds good, when do you want to meet? Create a daily review schedule. If you have 20 new phrases, review all of them every day. Say them out loud. Use them in example sentences. After a week, most of them should be pretty well memorized. Once a phrase is memorized, keep reviewing it occasionally so you don't forget it. Maybe once a week, go through all your memorized phrases and say them again. Use these phrases consciously in your practice and in real conversations. When you're doing the timer technique, try to incorporate these phrases. When you're doing question and answer practice, try to use these phrases in your answers. When you're practicing with a real person, look for opportunities to use these phrases. The more you actually use them, the more natural they become. Describing your environment as a practice. Let me give you much more detail on the describing technique because this is such a versatile and valuable practice method. Start with your immediate environment. Look around the room you're in right now. Describe everything you see. Don't worry about being comprehensive or organized. Just describe things as you notice them. I see a window. The window is large. There's natural light coming through the window. I see a desk. The desk has several things on it. There's a lamp on the desk. I see some books. I see a chair. The chair is comfortable looking. There's a bed in the room. The bed is made. The walls are painted a light color. There's a picture on the wall. Do this describing for 5 to 10 minutes. Just describe everything you see without stopping. Try to use a variety of sentence structures. Use simple sentences. Use descriptive sentences. Use sentences about location. Use sentences about color and texture and appearance. Then move to a different environment. Maybe describe a place you visited recently. Maybe describe the location where you work or study. Maybe describe a public place like a park or a cafe. For each environment, spend time describing it in detail. As you get better at describing, add more complexity. Instead of just describing what you see, describe what's happening. Use pleasant continuous tense. People are walking. A person is sitting on a bench. Someone is reading a book. A child is playing. A dog is running. The wind is blowing leaves around. Add emotional descriptions. The atmosphere feels peaceful. The place seems busy. The energy is positive. People look happy. The mood is relaxed. Add comparisons. The room is larger than I expected. The weather is colder than yesterday. The food tastes better than before. Add your own reactions. I find this place beautiful. I think this location is interesting. I enjoy being here. This view makes me calm. When you describe consistently, you are building vocabulary, you are practicing a wide variety of sentence structures, and you are training yourself to think in English without translation. You are looking at something and expressing it in English directly. Here's an interesting observation. Many learners find that when they practice describing, they start to notice details in the world more. You become more observant because you're constantly thinking about how to describe what you see. This enhanced observation actually makes you more engaged with the world around you. Thinking directly in English. This technique of breaking the mental translation barrier might be the most important thing we discuss. So let me go very deep into this. The core of the problem is that most learners have ingrained the habit of thinking in their native language first and then translating to English. This is a deeply entrenched neural pathway that's been built over years. Breaking it requires deliberate, consistent practice. Here's a technique to start breaking this habit. Look at an object. Before you think about it in any language, just look at it. Really observe it. Notice its shape, color, texture. Now, try to form a thought about it directly in English without allowing your native language to enter your mind. You might think something like, the lamp is silver and has a smooth surface. Try to let that thought form directly in English. This is hard at first. Your native language might keep intruding. When you notice this happening, gently redirect yourself back to English thinking. Here's another technique. When you're narrating your day or narrating what you're doing, speak only in English. Don't allow yourself to think in your native language. If you can't remember a word, describe it using words you know or move on to a different thought. But don't switch to your native language and translate. At first, this will feel very effortful and slow. Your speech might be halting, but over time, as you practice consistently, something amazing happens. English starts to become your first language for these activities. It becomes more automatic. It requires less effort. Here's a lifestyle approach to this. Whenever possible, surround yourself with English. Change your phone language to English. Change your computer settings to English. Listen to English podcasts while you're doing chores. Watch English videos. Read English text. The more you immerse yourself in English, the more naturally your brain will start thinking in English. One interesting phenomenon that many learners experience is that they sometimes dream in English or they have internal monologues in English, even when they're not deliberately practicing. This is a sign that your brain is really shifting its language processing. It means the techniques are working, but reaching this point doesn't happen immediately. It takes consistent practice, usually several months. Don't get discouraged if you find yourself still translating a lot at first. This is normal. With practice, the translation will decrease and direct English thinking will increase. Common mistakes and how to avoid them. As you are practicing these techniques, you are probably going to make some mistakes. That's completely normal. But let me address some of the most common mistakes learners make so you can try to avoid them. The first common mistake is trying to speak in complex structures too early. You want to sound impressive, so you're trying to use complex grammar, advanced vocabulary, long sentences with multiple clauses. The result is that you struggle, you pause frequently, you sound unnatural, and you lose confidence. The solution is to commit to simplicity for a period of time. Make a rule for yourself that you can only speak in simple sentences with basic structures. This rule actually helps you develop fluency faster because you're removing the barrier of complexity. The second mistake is not practicing the sentence patterns enough. You learn the patterns once and then move on to other techniques. But patterns need to be practiced until they are completely automatic. You should be able to generate a sentence using a pattern without thinking about it. The solution is to dedicate focused time to patterns. Make pattern practice a regular part of your routine even as you move on to other techniques. The third mistake is shadowing passively. You listen to a native speaker and you kind of repeat along, but you're not really focusing on the rhythm and intonation. You're just mimicking the words loosely. The solution is to actively focus during shadowing. Really listen for the rhythm. Really try to match the intonation. Put effort into coordinating your speech with the speaker's speech. That's when shadowing becomes truly powerful. The fourth mistake is not using the question and answer technique in a real way. You prepare answers to common questions and memorize them. Then when someone asks you the question, you just recite your prepared answer. This doesn't build conversational fluency because you're not actually responding, you're just reproducing. The solution is to use question and answer as a tool for spontaneous practice. When you ask yourself questions or someone asks you questions, try to form a new answer each time rather than reciting a memorized response. Let the answer come naturally, even if it's slightly different each time. The fifth mistake is not using the timer technique with enough intensity. You set a timer for 1 minute, but you spend half the time thinking of sentences. You're not really pushing your brain to generate language quickly. The solution is to really push yourself during timer practice. Generate sentences rapidly, one after another. Don't stop to think. Just keep the stream of sentences going. It should feel a bit challenging and fast paced. That's when you're building real speed. The sixth mistake is not incorporating memorized phrases into your actual speaking. You memorize the phrases, but then you don't actually use them when you talk. They just sit in your memory. The solution is to consciously use your memorized phrases. When you're practicing question and answer, specifically try to use memorized phrases in your answers. When you're speaking with real people, look for opportunities to use these phrases. Make a rule that you'll use at least 5 memorized phrases in every practice session. The seventh mistake is not practicing describing enough. You do the describing exercise once and move on. But describing should be something you practice regularly because it's so valuable for building fluency. The solution is to make describing part of your daily routine. Spend at least 10 to 15 minutes every day describing your environment or imaginary environments. Make it a consistent practice. The eighth mistake is being too self-conscious about your accent. You're so worried about sounding good that you're not fully engaged in the content of what you're saying. Your anxiety about your accent is actually making your speech worse. The solution is to shift your focus from how you sound to what you're saying. Focus on communicating your message clearly. Focus on the content of your speech, not the delivery. Ironically, when you relax about how you sound and focus on what you're saying, your delivery usually improves. The ninth mistake is isolating yourself too much. You practice these techniques alone and never interact with real people. While solo practice is valuable, it has limits. Real interaction is essential for real fluency development. The solution is to make real interaction a regular part of your practice, even if it's just once a week. Find a language exchange partner, take a class, have conversations with friends who speak English. Even brief interactions are valuable. The 10th mistake is not celebrating progress. You're always focused on how far you still have to go and not acknowledging how far you've come. This is discouraging and unmotivating. The solution is to deliberately celebrate your progress. Listen to recordings of yourself from months ago and hear how much you've improved. Acknowledge when you have successful conversations. Keep a journal of your achievements. When you acknowledge progress, you build momentum for continued improvement. Advancing beyond the basics. After you've been practicing these techniques for several months and you're developing real conversational fluency, you might wonder what the next step is. How do you continue to improve? The first way to advance is to increase the complexity of your practice. Instead of just making simple sentences, make complex sentences with multiple clauses. Instead of describing your immediate environment, describe abstract concepts. Instead of answering basic questions, engage in discussions on complex topics. The second way is to specialize your practice. Maybe you want to become fluent in business English. Focus your practice on business-related vocabulary, business communication contexts, business interactions. Maybe you want to become fluent in English for travel. Focus your practice on travel-related vocabulary and situations. The third way is to increase the speed and spontaneity of your practice. Challenge yourself to have conversations with less preparation. Engage with English media that's faster and more complex. Push yourself to respond in real time without planning. The fourth way is to start producing English. Instead of just consuming and speaking, start creating. Write articles in English. Start a blog. Create videos where you speak English. Record podcasts. When you produce English, you're creating even more opportunity to use and refine your English. The fifth way is to engage with English in diverse contexts. If you've mostly been practicing conversation, start reading literature in English. If you've been consuming content, start producing. If you've been speaking on a limited range of topics, branch out to new topics that challenge you to learn new vocabulary and concepts. Specialized practice for specific situations. Many learners want to develop fluency for specific situations. Maybe you need English for work. Maybe you want to be able to watch movies without subtitles. Maybe you want to read English literature. let me address how to adapt the techniques for specific goals. For professional English, focus your vocabulary building and your practice on professional contexts. Listen to TED Talks about your field. Watch interviews with professionals in your industry. Practice the kinds of conversations you'd have at work. Use question and answer practice with work related questions. Describe workplace scenarios. This specialization makes your practice more relevant and engaging. For English media consumption, focus your shadowing practice on the kind of media you want to consume. If you want to watch movies, shadow along with movie dialogue. If you want to understand podcasts, practice with podcasts. Pay special attention to faster speech and natural, casual English. For reading English literature, practice is different. You're not primarily doing speaking practice, but the techniques still apply. You read passages and describe what you understand. You memorize beautiful phrases or important quotes. You practice speaking about the themes and ideas in what you're reading. For English in travel contexts, practice with travel vocabulary and travel situations. Ask yourself and answer questions about travel. Describe places you visited. Practice conversations you'd have while traveling. Ordering food, asking for directions, booking a hotel, talking to people you meet. Dealing with plateaus. Many learners experience a plateau in their progress. They improve quickly at first, but then the improvement slows down or seems to stop entirely. This is a normal and expected part of the learning process, but it can be discouraging. When you hit a plateau, it usually means you need to change your approach. The techniques that got you to this level might not be enough to push you to the next level. You need to increase the difficulty or change the technique. Here are some ways to break through a plateau. First, increase the difficulty of the material you're using for shadowing. Choose faster speakers or speakers with less clear pronunciation. Choose topics that are more complex. Second, decrease the amount of time you spend on basic techniques like timer practice and increase the amount of time on more advanced techniques like real conversation and complex discussions. Third, introduce new techniques that you haven't focused on yet. If you've been doing lots of shadowing, maybe focus more on storytelling. If you've been doing lots of question and answer, maybe do more describing or more conversation. Fourth, change your environment or context. If you've been studying alone, start studying with a group. If you've been studying with one type of content, try different content. If you've been speaking on the same topics, introduce new topics. Fifth, set more challenging goals. Instead of aiming to have a conversation, aim to have a debate. Instead of aiming to understand a podcast, aim to understand a podcast without any breaks to rewind. Sustaining your practice long term. Finally, I want to address how to sustain your English practice over the long term. Many learners make huge progress initially and then stop practicing and start losing their skills. English learning isn't a short-term project, it's a long-term commitment. Here are some ways to sustain your practice. First, make it part of your identity. Instead of thinking, I'm practicing English, think, I'm a person who speaks English. This identity shift makes the practice feel less like a chore and more like just part of who you are. Second, find ways to make it enjoyable. If practicing English feels like a burden, you won't stick with it. Find topics that genuinely interest you. Use content that you actually enjoy. Speak with people you actually like. The more you enjoy the process, the more likely you are to stick with it. Third, build it into your daily routine so thoroughly that not practicing feels strange. When English practice is part of your morning routine, part of your commute, part of your workday, part of your evening, it becomes a habit that you do automatically. Fourth, continue to challenge yourself. As you improve, keep raising the bar. This keeps the practice interesting and keeps you motivated by continual progress. Fifth, periodically revisit your why. Why did you start learning English? What were your original goals? What has changed? Reconnecting with your original motivation helps you stay committed over the long term. Alright, we've covered an incredible amount of material in this episode. We've gone through 10 detailed techniques that can transform your ability to speak English fluently. We've talked about the amazing benefits that come from consistent practice. We've given you detailed implementation guidance. We've addressed common mistakes and obstacles. And we've talked about how to sustain your practice over the long term. I want to bring us back to something I said at the very beginning of this episode. The problem that most English learners face isn't a lack of knowledge. It's that they haven't trained their brain properly to produce language spontaneously. But the beautiful thing is that this is completely solvable. Your brain is capable of learning to do this. You just need the right techniques and consistent practice. Now, here's what I want you to do. Don't just listen to this episode and then move on. Actually implement this. Choose one technique to start with. Commit to practicing it every single day for 2 weeks. Really commit to it. Set a specific time. Do it at that time every single day. After 2 weeks, you'll see results. You'll feel a difference in your ability to construct sentences. You'll feel more confidence. And that success will motivate you to continue and to add more techniques. I want to leave you with this thought. Speaking English fluently is absolutely achievable for you. It doesn't matter your age, your background, your current level, or anything else. If you commit to these techniques and practice consistently, you will develop fluency. It might take a few months, it might take a year, but it will happen. There's something really special about reaching a point where you can express yourself freely in a language that wasn't your first language. You're not limited by language anymore. You can have conversations with anyone. You can access opportunities that weren't available to you before. You can express the full complexity of your thoughts and feelings. That's a powerful thing. And more than that, the process of learning to speak English fluently teaches you something about yourself. It teaches you that you can set a goal and achieve it through consistent effort. It teaches you that you can challenge yourself and grow. It teaches you that transformation is possible. Those lessons extend far beyond English. They affect how you approach other challenges in your life. So I'm encouraging you, take these techniques, practice them consistently, be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, connect with other learners, and most importantly, believe in yourself. You can do this. Before you go, I have a few important reminders. If you found this episode valuable, please hit that like button. Your support means the world to me and helps me continue creating content like this. Subscribe to this podcast channel so you never miss an episode. Every episode is designed to help you improve your English speaking in practical, applicable ways. Make sure you check out our podcast playlist, where you'll find all of our previous episodes on various aspects of English speaking and communication. There's an incredible collection of content there that will support your learning journey. Share this episode with a friend or fellow English learner who might benefit from these techniques. We are building a community of people committed to English fluency, and every person who joins makes the community stronger. Leave a comment in the comment section and tell me which technique you're going to try first. Or tell me about your own English learning journey. Your stories and your engagement inspire me and they help other learners see what's possible. Alright, my friends, that's going to wrap up today's episode on breakthrough speaking techniques for English fluency. I'm Mano and I've absolutely loved sharing this with you. I hope you found it valuable. I hope you feel inspired and empowered to take action on these techniques. Remember, fluency isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create through your choices and your consistent action. You have the power to transform your English speaking ability. All you need is the right techniques, which you now have, and the commitment to practice consistently, which only you can decide to give. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I genuinely appreciate your attention and your commitment to improving your English. I can't wait to hear about your progress. Please come back and let me know how these techniques are working for you. Until next time, keep practicing, keep challenging yourself, and remember that fluency is within your reach. You've got this. I believe in you and I'm cheering for your success. See you in the next episode. This is Mano signing off. Keep speaking English, keep improving, and keep growing. Thank you.